Jenny Lewis owned a small diner just outside a quiet town in Oregon. It sat at the edge of a long road where trucks and bikes passed by but rarely stopped. The building was old but clean, with red boots, a jukebox in the corner, and the smell of fresh coffee always in the air. Jenny ran the place by herself most days, waking before sunrise to bake pies and get the grill hot before the breakfast crowd arrived. She had regular customers, old men from the nearby farms, truck drivers who passed through every week, and families who came for pancakes on Sunday mornings. Jenny knew all their names and what they liked to eat. She never needed to write down orders because she remembered everything. People liked her for that. She was quiet, kind, and always wore an apron with flour on it. Life in her diner was simple. Music from the 60s played softly in the background. Coffee cups clinked gently on the tables. The town itself didn't see much excitement. There was no big city nearby, no rush, no trouble. Jenny liked it that way. She had opened the diner 10 years ago after her parents passed it down to her. And in all that time, nothing strange had ever happened. But one Tuesday morning, something changed. The bell over the front door rang, and a man walked in. He was tall, with a thick jacket covered in patches and dark glasses hiding his eyes. The biggest patch on his back said Hell's Angels. He looked around the room slowly, then walked to the last booth by the window and sat down. Some of the regulars paused. One of the old farmers leaned over and whispered, "You see that? He's one of them bikers." A few others nodded, but no one said anything out loud. Jenny didn't act surprised. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over with the menu in her hand. "Good morning," she said with a smile. "Coffee?" The man nodded. "Black, please." She brought him the coffee and took his order. He asked for eggs and toast. Simple. He didn't say much, just looked out the window and drank slowly. The room was quieter than usual, but Jenny moved through it like normal. It wasn't long before the door opened again. This time, two police officers stepped in. They looked around and walked straight toward the man in the booth. They didn't smile. "You got some business here?" one of them asked, standing right by his table. The man looked up, calm but quiet. He didn't answer right away. The room went even quieter. Jenny stood behind the counter, watching closely. Something about the way the officer spoke didn't sit right with her. She had seen that look before, people judging someone just by how they looked. Her hand tightened around the coffee pot. Something told her this wasn't going to be a normal morning. The man sitting at booth 6 kept his eyes on the officers. He didn't raise his voice or move quickly. He just sat still and calm, as if he'd seen this kind of thing before. The patch on his jacket made people uneasy, but he hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't caused any trouble since he walked in. He only came in for breakfast and a quiet moment. The taller officer stepped a little closer and spoke again. "We've had complaints about people like you passing through town. What's your name?" The man didn't answer right away. He looked down at his coffee and then up at the officer. "I'm just here for breakfast," he said quietly. The second officer frowned. "Don't get smart. This is a peaceful place. We don't need gang members hanging around." At that moment, Jenny walked over. She placed a plate of food in front of the man and looked at the officers. Her voice was steady, but there was a firmness in her tone. "He came in, sat down, ordered his food, and didn't bother anyone," she said. "He's not causing any problems. He's welcome here just like anyone else." The taller officer gave her a look. "You don't know who he is," he said. Jenny didn't step back. "I know he's hungry, and I know he's a paying customer. That's enough for me." For a moment, no one said anything. The room felt heavy, like the air wasn't moving. The other customers were still, watching from their booths. The officers looked at each other, then back at the man. "Fine," the first one said. "But if we hear anything, we'll be back." They turned and left without another word. The door closed behind them with a soft thud. Jenny turned back to the man. "Sorry about that," she said. He gave her a small nod. "It's all right. I'm used to it." She didn't ask him any more questions. She just walked back behind the counter and went on pouring coffee. The other customers slowly returned to their conversations, but the mood had changed. The man finished his food, left a 20 on the table for a $10 meal, and stood up. As he walked toward the door, he paused for a moment and looked at Jenny. "Thank you," he said quietly. Then he pushed the door open and walked out. Jenny watched him leave. She didn't know his story. She didn't know where he came from or where he was going. But she knew one thing. He had been treated unfairly, and that didn't sit right with her. She cleaned his table like she always did, wiped down the counter, and kept going with her day. But something told her that wasn't the last she'd see of him. That night, Jenny sat at the kitchen table in her small home, stirring a pot of stew. The warm smell of vegetables and herbs filled the air, and outside, the stars twinkled over the quiet town. Her husband, Mark, sat across from her, reading the newspaper. The house was peaceful, but Jenny felt unsettled. Her mind kept replaying the scene from earlier that day. Mark looked up from his paper. "You okay, Jenny?" She sighed and set the spoon down. "I don't know. Something didn't feel right today. The way those officers treated him, it just didn't sit well with me." Mark lowered the paper and watched her closely. "You mean that biker?" Jenny nodded. "Yeah, I know people judge him by his jacket, but he didn't cause any trouble. He just came in for a meal like anyone else. I don't know. I just couldn't stand by and let them treat him like that." Mark leaned back in his chair. "I get it, Jenny. You've always had a soft spot for the underdog. But that man, he wasn't just anyone. Those bikers have a reputation. You know that." "But he wasn't doing anything wrong," she said, her voice firm. "I can't just turn my back when I see someone getting treated unfairly." Mark didn't say anything for a moment. He knew his wife's heart. She wasn't the kind of person to back down from what she believed was right. But he also knew the world wasn't always as simple as she wanted it to be. "Just be careful, okay?" He finally said. "We don't need any trouble." Jenny smiled weakly. "I'll be fine." They ate their dinner in silence, the conversation drifting to other topics. But in the back of Jenny's mind, she couldn't stop thinking about the man from Booth 6. Who was he? Why had he been treated like that? And more importantly, would something happen because of what she'd done? As the evening went on, Jenny tried to push the thoughts aside, but they kept coming back. She went to bed late that night, still tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling that her small act of standing up for the man had set something bigger in motion. The next morning, she woke up early, like she always did. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the first signs of light were just starting to creep over the hills. She started her usual morning routine, brewing coffee, checking the bakery items, and getting the diner ready for the day. But as she stepped outside to bring in the morning papers, she heard something. At first, it was just a faint rumble like distant thunder. Then it grew louder, the sound of engines. Jenny's heart skipped a beat. She squinted down the road and saw it. The first bike appeared, followed by another, then another. One by one, more motorcycles roared down the highway, lining up at the diner. By the time the sun rose, there were dozens of bikes parked outside, engines running and leather-clad bikers standing in front of her diner. Jenny's jaw dropped. What was going on? She stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. Then the door opened, and the first biker walked in, the man from Booth 6. He smiled at her, a small but knowing smile. "Morning," he said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Jenny blinked in shock. "Morning?" she repeated, unsure of what was happening. He nodded. "Just wanted to say thank you for what you did yesterday." Jenny's head was spinning. "Wait, what's going on?" He glanced out the window at the line of motorcycles. "Just making sure you know we got your back." Jenny stared at him, not sure whether to feel confused, scared, or amazed. What had she just stepped into? The door to Jenny's diner opened wide, and more bikers walked in, one after another, their boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. The sound of their engines still hummed in the air outside, a constant reminder of the dozens of motorcycles now lined up along the road. Jenny stood behind the counter, trying to process what was happening. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped a coffee cup with a rag, but she didn't say anything. The man from Booth 6 walked up to the counter, smiling like he was visiting an old friend. "Don't worry," he said, noticing her hesitation. "We're not here to cause trouble. We just want to show our thanks." "Thanks for what?" Jenny asked, still in shock. "For standing up for one of us," he said. "You might not know it, but that's rare. Most people either don't care or are too afraid to speak up." Jenny looked out the window at the bikers standing by their bikes. They weren't making a scene or causing any trouble. In fact, they seemed calm, polite even. They looked like regular people, just like the farmers and truckers who came by every day. The man continued, "You treated us like anyone else. No judgment, no questions. That's why we're here, to show you some respect." Jenny swallowed, still unsure of what to think. She had never expected this kind of response. She had only stepped in because it felt wrong to see someone being harassed for no reason. As more bikers entered, the atmosphere inside the diner started to shift. The once quiet and sleepy room now buzzed with voices. But it wasn't loud or aggressive. They spoke quietly, ordered breakfast, and treated Jenny and the other customers with a surprising amount of kindness. A biker sitting at the far booth waved to Jenny. "Don't worry, miss. We're just here to have a good meal and show our support. You got a good place here." Jenny nodded, still unsure how to respond. She had expected trouble, but instead she was receiving nothing but respect. By the time the diner had filled up, the bikers were scattered across the booths and tables, eating their meals and chatting amongst themselves. A few even helped clear plates for Jenny, offering to take out the trash or sweep the floors. As Jenny moved around the diner, she noticed something else. The regular customers who had been there before the bikers arrived were watching, but they weren't as nervous anymore. The farmers and truckers were beginning to relax. A few even nodded at the bikers, offering small smiles. It was a strange sight for Jenny, her small diner, usually quiet and familiar, now filled with a large group of bikers who had come out of nowhere. But there was no anger, no violence. Just a simple moment of respect being shared between two very different groups of people. The man from booth 6 came up to Jenny again, handing her a stack of cash. "For the tip," he said, "and for everything else." Jenny stared at the money, surprised. "You don't need to." He shook his head. "It's nothing. We just want you to know that we appreciate what you did." As he walked back to his seat, Jenny realized that this moment, this unexpected show of kindness, was changing something in the town. Word would spread, and things would never be the same. But in that moment, all she could think about was how one small act could create a ripple effect, bringing together people who would have never spoken to each other before. What was happening in her diner today wasn't just about food. It was about something much bigger. The morning rush came like a wave. Jenny had never seen so many people in her diner at once, and certainly not with so many motorcycles lined up outside. The sound of engines still rumbled in the air, but it wasn't overwhelming. It was almost like background noise now, a steady hum that seemed to fit with the rhythm of the diner. The bikers were calm and respectful, chatting quietly as they ate their breakfast. Jenny moved quickly between tables, filling coffee cups and taking orders. There were more people than she was used to, but somehow it didn't feel chaotic. The bikers were organized, knowing exactly what they wanted and where to sit. The regular customers, though a bit surprised, were starting to warm up to the new atmosphere. One of the bikers, a man with a large beard and tattoos on his arms, caught Jenny's attention as she walked by. "This place is something else," he said with a smile. "You've got a good thing going here." Jenny paused for a moment, looking around at the full diner. She had to admit it was a strange feeling, seeing so many unfamiliar faces all at once, but it wasn't as bad as she thought it might be. Everyone seemed to be enjoying their meals, and no one was causing trouble. Another biker, sitting at a booth near the window, raised his hand when Jenny passed. "You know," he said, "I've been to a lot of diners on the road, but this one's different. It's got a vibe. You should be proud of it." Jenny smiled, feeling a little more at ease. "Thank you," she replied. "I'm just doing what I love, feeding people, making sure they're happy." It felt good to hear their words, but at the same time, it left her with more questions. Why had they all shown up like this? Why did they feel the need to thank her? She looked over at the man from booth 6, who was quietly sipping his coffee. He caught her eye and gave her a small nod. She couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity about him, about what had brought him and his friends to her diner. It wasn't just the bikers who were showing respect. Jenny noticed that the regular customers, people she had known for years, were starting to speak with the bikers too. The old farmer at the counter, who usually kept to himself, had struck up a conversation with one of the bikers about the weather. Another trucker was laughing with a biker over some joke. It was strange to see, but it made Jenny feel like something was shifting in the town. She kept moving around the room, refilling coffee cups and delivering food. As the morning wore on, the crowd began to thin out. One by one, the bikers finished their meals and got up to leave. They made sure to thank Jenny before heading out, offering more tips as they went. By noon, the diner was quieter, and the last of the bikers had left. The motorcycles were gone, and the only sound left was the clinking of silverware on plates. Jenny stood behind the counter, wiping down the surface, still trying to process what had just happened. It had been a strange, unexpected morning, but it wasn't a bad one. Looking out the window at the empty parking lot, Jenny couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the town. It wasn't just her diner that had been affected. The people who had come together today, people from different walks of life, had shared a moment of respect. Maybe it was just the start of something new. As she cleaned up the last of the tables, Jenny smiled to herself. Maybe, just maybe, things would never be the same again. The next few days were quieter. The town seemed to settle back into its usual routine, but there was a subtle change in the air. People looked at each other a little differently, as if something had shifted, though no one quite knew how to put it into words. The town was still small, still peaceful, but there was a new sense of understanding lingering between the people. Jenny's diner had never been busier, and it wasn't just because of the bikers. The regulars, the farmers, the truckers, and even the families who stopped by on weekends. They all came more often now. Some of them had heard about the bikers and the scene at the diner, and they were curious. Some just wanted to see if it was true that bikers could be polite and friendly. It was a strange feeling for Jenny. Her diner had always been a place for regulars, people who knew her by name and who came to enjoy a quiet meal. But now the door opened more often, and with it came a wider mix of faces. The small town, which had once felt so predictable, seemed a little less familiar now. One morning, just after the breakfast rush, a young woman came in alone. She sat down at the counter and ordered a cup of coffee. Jenny served her, offering a smile. "How's your day going?" Jenny asked, wiping down the counter in front of her. The woman smiled back, a little shy. "It's going well, thanks. Actually, I just moved here, looking for a fresh start." Jenny nodded, recognizing that feeling. Welcome to town. It's a quiet place, but it has its charm. They chatted for a bit longer, and Jenny learned that the woman had moved from a big city, tired of the fast pace and constant noise. She had chosen this small town for its calmness, hoping it would give her the peace she had been searching for. As the woman sipped her coffee, Jenny looked out the window. The sun was shining brightly, and the street outside seemed peaceful. But something had changed. It wasn't just the diner, it was the town itself. There was a new openness, a new way of looking at the people around them. The door opened, and Jenny turned to see one of the bikers from the group that had come by last week. He was standing in the doorway, glancing around the diner. Jenny recognized him instantly. He was the man who had been so calm when the officers had shown up. He smiled when he saw her, then walked up to the counter. "Hey, how's it going?" he asked. "Good, good," Jenny replied, still a bit surprised to see him again. "How about you? Still enjoying the breakfast around here?" He nodded, looking around at the empty diner. "It's peaceful here. Thought I'd stop in, said thanks again for everything." Jenny smiled. "You didn't need to do that, but I appreciate it." He shrugged. "Sometimes people just need to be reminded that there's good in the world, you know?" "I think I'm starting to see that," Jenny said, looking around the diner at the few customers who had quietly returned to their meals. The man nodded. "Sometimes it takes just one person to show others the way. You did that for us." He left shortly after, as quietly as he had come, but his words stayed with Jenny. She had never imagined that standing up for someone would lead to so much change. As the days passed, more people came into the diner. Some were curious, some were just passing through, and some had heard about the bikers and wanted to see for themselves. But no one treated the bikers the way they had before. There was no fear, no judgment, just a quiet understanding that people, no matter their background, deserved respect. Jenny couldn't help but feel proud of the small role she had played in all of this. Her diner had become more than just a place for breakfast. It had become a symbol of something bigger, a place where people could come together, if only for a moment, and see each other for who they truly were. The town wasn't the same as it had been before. It was something better now, and Jenny, standing behind her counter with a coffee pot in her hand, knew that it was just the beginning. A week later, Jenny stood behind the counter of her diner, wiping down the tables as the early morning light poured in through the windows. The quiet town outside seemed just as it always had, but to her, everything felt different. The people were different now. She could feel it in the air. There was a kind of connection, an unspoken understanding, that hadn't been there before. The door opened, and in walked the man from booth 6 again. He was alone this time, no bikers with him. He took a seat at the counter, his eyes scanning the room as he settled in. Jenny couldn't help but smile when she saw him. It had been a few days since he and his friends had filled the diner, and she had been wondering when he'd stop by again. "Morning," he said with his usual calm voice. "Morning," Jenny replied, filling a cup with coffee. She set it down in front of him. "How's the road treating you?" He took a sip, nodding slowly. "Good. It's always good when you're heading somewhere new." Jenny tilted her head, curious. "And where's that?" "Wherever it takes me," he said, with a small smile. "I've been around, but this place, it's different." "Different how?" Jenny asked. He looked around the diner, his eyes lingering on the small groups of customers chatting over their meals, the quiet hum of the morning. "It's peaceful here. I think people are starting to understand each other a little more." Jenny leaned against the counter, thinking about what he said. It was true. Things had changed in the town. After the bikers had left, the townspeople began to look at each other in a new way. Old divisions, old fears were starting to fade. It was like they had all shared a moment of understanding, a moment that made them realize that no matter their backgrounds, they all had something in common. "You were right about one thing," the man continued. "Sometimes it takes just one person to make a difference, and you did that." Jenny shook her head, surprised by his words. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what felt right." "That's the thing," he said, looking at her seriously. "Doing what's right isn't always easy, but you did it anyway. And now, people are seeing that. It's not about the bikers or the diner. It's about the example you set." Jenny was quiet for a moment, taking in what he said. She hadn't expected anything like this to happen when she stood up for that man. She had just been trying to do the right thing, but now she realized it had affected more people than she could have imagined. She glanced out the window, watching the town slowly come to life. She noticed the usual faces, farmers, shopkeepers, and travelers, heading to their daily tasks. But now they were all sharing something more. There was a quiet respect in the air that hadn't been there before. The man finished his coffee and stood up, placing a few bills on the counter. He smiled at Jenny. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You've got something special here. Don't forget that." Jenny smiled back, watching him leave. As the door closed behind him, she felt a sense of peace. She didn't know where the man was headed next, but for the first time in a long while, Jenny felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. As the door chimed once more with the arrival of a few new customers, Jenny felt a quiet pride in her heart. Her diner had become more than just a place to eat. It had become a place where people came together, where they could see past their differences and just be human. And as the day began, Jenny knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of a new chapter for her, the diner, and the whole town. Days passed, and Jenny's diner kept its quiet rhythm. Each morning brought regulars with their usual orders, travelers with curious eyes, and sometimes strangers who had heard about the place from someone else on the road. The story of the day the bikers arrived had begun to spread, not just in town, but to nearby places too. People started calling it the day the town changed. Jenny never tried to explain it. She just poured the coffee, served the food, and let people talk if they wanted. She listened more than she spoke. She had come to understand that people often carry stories with them, even if they don't always say them out loud. One afternoon, just before closing, an older man came in. He wore a worn jacket and walked slowly like he'd been traveling for a long time. He looked around the diner, nodded politely, then took a seat at the counter. Jenny walked over, wiping her hands on a towel. "What can I get you?" she asked. "Just coffee," the man replied. "Black." She poured him a cup and set it down. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The diner was almost empty, just one couple near the window and the sound of a radio playing soft music in the background. "I heard about this place," the man said suddenly. "From a guy on the road, said it was different." Jenny smiled slightly. "We get that sometimes." He took a sip of his coffee. He said people here aren't quick to judge, that someone stood up for a man when no one else did. Jenny looked at the man, her expression calm. "I don't know if it was anything big. Just didn't like the way he was being treated." The man nodded. "That's what makes it big. Most people would have stayed quiet." He didn't say much more after that. He finished his coffee slowly, left a small tip, and walked out into the fading sunlight. Jenny watched him go, wondering what story he carried, what road had led him there. Later that evening, Jenny sat alone in the diner, lights dimmed, looking over the guest book she had placed near the door a few days ago. It had started as a small idea, something to let travelers leave a note or a thought behind. Now, page after page was filled with kind words, short thank you messages, and even a few drawings from kids. One message stood out. Written in messy handwriting, it said, "Thank you for reminding us that kindness still exists." Jenny closed the book gently and placed it back on the counter. She didn't need praise or attention. She just wanted her diner to feel like a place where people could sit, breathe, and feel safe, even for a little while. Outside, the street was quiet. The lights from the diner windows glowed softly in the dark. Jenny stood at the door for a moment, then locked up for the night. Tomorrow would bring more stories. She was ready.